All right, today we're going to look at vertical and phase shifts for our sine and cosine functions. So quick reminder, we can have y equals and then a times some trig function, it could be sine, cosine, and all the rest of them, of b times x minus h plus k. A helps us with our amplitude, vertical stretch for all of our other functions. B helps us with our period. H is our shift left and right, and K is our shift up and down. So we got several equations, and we're going to try to identify all of our useful information. So starting with this first one, it is in fact a cosine function. Everybody should get that part correct. Amplitude. So we look at -3. The most common wrong answer is to write -3. Remember, it is the absolute value of -3, which is 3. All right, the period. We look for b. In this case, b is 1. There's no number showing up there, but there is a 1 there. So it's going to be 2 pi over 1, which is just 2 pi. If we go for our phase shift, that's saying how much is this graph moved left or right? So we have a minus pi. So minus indicates we are going to go to the right. So we are going to go right pi units. And then finally, up or down, that is indicated by the +2. Plus is up. So we're going to go up 2 units. All right, so let's look at number 2. Same thing. Starting with, it's a sine function. Amplitude, we look for the number out front. It is a 1. Absolute value of 1 is 1. For the period, we look at the b value, in this case, 6. So it's going to be 2 pi over 6, which is pi over 3. Remember, you do need to simplify. All right, inside the parentheses, we're going to look for our phase shift. Are we going left? Are we going right? Plus 2 pi. Plus is to the left. So left, 2 pi units. And finally, our vertical shift. -4 indicates down. Down 4. All right. Try to do number 3 on your own. Pause the video, and when you come back, we'll check to see if you have this. All right, so now that you've worked it out, let's see. We have our function is cosine. Good job, everybody got that right. Amplitude, we all said 2. Good job on that. Period, we look at the b value 4, and you all showed me your work. You did 2 pi over 4, and then you simplified and said it's pi over 2. And then you went to the phase shift, plus 3 pi over 2, plus is to the left. So left, 3 pi over 2. And finally, -5, so down 5. So everybody got that right. Let's try the last one. Same thing, pause the video, see if you can come up with it, and come back and check. All right, so we know that it is a sine function. We have an amplitude of 4. We have a period of pi, but you're not going to just write down pi. You're going to show me where did that pi come from, because it is 2 pi divided by b, which is 2. That's how we came up with pi. All right, minus is to the right, so we're going to go right pi over 3. And +1 at the end is up 1. So that's how we can get all of our important information from the equation. And we could use that to graph it. Let's try to go the other way, though. Let's say we get a graph and we want to find all that information. So, I would like to know what is the equation. So before we can do that, we got to figure everything out. So here's a function. Now, in order for us to all agree on an answer, we have to agree on a few things. Looking at this, I cannot tell you whether it is sine or cosine because it can be written either way. They are related functions. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by saying we're given the fact this is a sine function. All right, so knowing that, now I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a very specific shape. I am looking for either this shape or this shape. That's our graph for sine. It makes like a kind of tilted S. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say that A is greater than 0. In other words, it's positive. So that tells me I'm looking for this. Now that I have that information, we can really limit how many answers there are to this. So we can kind of come up with a right answer. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is identify my midline. So that's going to help me find everything else. So the middle of this graph is right here. Half of it's above that line, half of it's below that line. That is y equals -1. That's what we call our midline. All right, so first thing I'm going to try to find, if you recall, our function rather, should say y equals a sine b times x minus h plus k. I'm just going to try to find things somewhat in order. So I'm going to start with figuring out what is that amplitude. So to find the amplitude, I am going to go from the midline, and I am going to go to the maximum value, or I could go to the minimum. All right, so the midline's right here. Here's a maximum point, and I can say that distance is 2. So I know the absolute value of a is 2, but we said it's right side up, so it's just going to be a equals 2. So I have 2 sine. All right, the next thing to look at, the period. Okay, so I need to find one full sine wave. Now, there are several full sine waves. I could use this one. I could use this one. Lots of choices. So I'm going to go with this guy for my sine. All right. So what I need to do is calculate what distance that took. Now, unfortunately, my graph, when I transferred it, didn't transfer all of my vertical lines on my x-axis, so I'm just going to give you some information. This right here is pi over 2. Here's pi. And then this one is actually 7 pi over 6. All right, unfortunately, it didn't show up the way I had intended, so if I was wanting you to do this question, I would make sure those were there for you. So what I need to do is figure out how wide that is. In other words, how far is it from pi over 2 to 7 pi over 6? Well, what I'm asking is, what is 7 pi over 6 minus pi over 2? That's really a 1 pi over 2. What's nice about this, for the math part of it, we can kind of ignore the pi as long as we put it back in our answer. 7/6 minus 1/2 is 4/6, which is really 2/3. My fraction went upside down on me. So really, for this problem, if I throw my pi back in there, it's 2 pi over 3. Now, how is that helpful? Well, I know that the period is equal to 2 pi over b, but 2 pi over b is 2 pi over 3. Oh, b equals 3. So now that I know b equals 3, I can put that in there. So I have 3. X minus some value, and then plus k. All right, so how much did we shift over? That's actually something we should all hopefully see right now, but let me add this in here for you. We started our sine function here, so how far to the right did I go? Well, went pi over 2. Now, to the right, remember, is minus, so I'm doing minus pi over 2. And then the last thing I have left is, how much was this shifted up or down? The midline tells you that, because before we move things around, for regular sine, before it shifted, the midline is at y equals 0. Well, I shifted down to -1. So I shifted down 1, it's -1. And in fact, that midline is always the value of k. So the midline is y equals k. So if you know the midline, you've got that value for the end for shift up or down. All right, at this point, you should be able to finish the work on your paper, and make sure that you come to your weekly Zoom if you need additional help with this or if you have any questions.